proud to present today the conversation on allyship. Joining me in this incredible educational conversation, I have a leadership and management consultant who is a passionate advocate for BIPOC mental health, the co-founder and CEO of A Better Force, Dr. Saamiya Seraj.
Hi, Lorelai.
Hello, Saamiya. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, other than recovering from bronchitis.
Well, we're super glad to have you here, powering through that. I'm going to step away and let you take over, okay?
Thank you so much. I'm going to start sharing my screen. I'm really excited here to everyone who's tuning in. Thank you for joining us. And I know talking about race and racism can be difficult and uncomfortable, but that's precisely what we need to be doing more of to get to a better, more equitable future. The pervasiveness and complexity of structural racism makes the journey towards true allyship a very difficult one, but we have to start. And that's why I'm here today, to be your guide on a beginner's journey towards racial allyship. So before we begin, a little bit more about me. I'm the CEO and co-founder of A Better Force, which is a professional development and leadership training company in Austin, Texas. I identify as an Asian American, Desi, cisgender woman, and the pronouns that I use are she and her. I was born and brought up in Bangladesh, and I came to the US for my undergraduate in civil engineering, and I loved it so much that I ended up doing a PhD in it. After finishing my PhD, I worked in the construction industry for 5 years. While I was there, I saw how many young professionals struggled in both their personal and professional lives. And it wasn't always because of an overt toxic workplace. Sometimes it was strategic mismanagement of talent within their own companies. Sometimes it was micromessaging in a non-inclusive space. And as a woman of color myself, I saw how these various things shattered our confidence and really eroded away at our brilliance. And so that's when the idea of A Better Force took flight. And we launched this company late last year in the middle of the pandemic to help young professionals like yourselves to thrive in their personal and professional lives. So with that background, let's dive into today's topic on allyship in action. A good place to start is by explaining why allies are so powerful and necessary. I'd like you to imagine a 20-year-old Muslim girl all alone in a new city for an internship. For the first time in her life, she was spending Eid away from her friends and family. And Eid is a very important Muslim festival. It's a festival of good food and cheer. You dress up, you visit loved ones, and you eat lots and lots of delicious food after a month of fasting. So when she was going out to dinner with the other interns, this young girl thought, hey, let me dress in my traditional clothes to add a little bit of festivity. But when she actually reached the restaurant, the first thing she heard was, what the hell are you wearing? I'll repeat. She heard, what the hell are you wearing? Can you imagine how that must have felt? This is not my personal story. This is actually the story of a person who's really dear to me, my little sister. When she told me this story, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. And the first thing I asked her was, no one else said anything? And she said, no one else said anything. And she told me that it took years for her to wear that same traditional clothes again because she just couldn't shake the bad vibes that it gave her. And so imagine how the story would have been different if someone spoke up for her and said, hey, that's not right. Or an ally stood up in that ringing silence to say, hey, that's really rude. And so that's why we're here today. Because as an ally, you can make a difference by leveraging your privilege, your power, and your voice. And so I love keeping things simple. So we'll be breaking how to be an effective ally in 3 steps. And the first is to educate yourself on understanding BIPOC issues. And the term BIPOC means Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And I use this term to denote historically marginalized racial groups. And I'll be very specific in my language. When I have to indicate a specific race, I'll be using Black, Asian, Latinx, etc. The second step is to question white norms and the bias that exists in society. And the third and final step is to leverage your power and privilege to speak up. And it's really easy to remember this. You can think of the word equal. I know it's not the correct spelling, but you can think of EQ and L, educate, question, and leverage. So let's dive into the first part, educating yourself and understanding BIPOC issues. So this could be the engineer in me, but I feel like we have to understand a problem thoroughly first before we can actually get to the solution. And the problem is, whether we realize it or not, the invisible hands of race plays a role in everything. And this means that for BIPOC communities, racism pervades in every sphere of life that they attend. And so, in order to be allies, what we have to do is first understand the different types of harm that is being done in BIPOC communities. And then, second, we have to train ourselves to see the invisible so that we know when to intervene and protest. So the first thing is the imminent harm that's being done to BIPOC communities. And the brutality and violence makes it easier to notice and protest against. But even here, some invisible harm starts to creep in, as you can see from the headline here, right? You see the headline says, fears of anti-Asian bias, instead of simply saying due to anti-Asian bias. This is a headline from when the Atlanta shootings happened. And you might think this is a subtle difference, but remember, words matter. And subtle messaging like this can make the oppression even more dangerous because it masks the harm. It makes it invisible. Now, the second thing to note, and this is much harder to detect, it's the systematic deprivation of resources in BIPOC communities, whether it's redlining or housing segregation, or inequality in education and transportation and healthcare, or voter suppression laws, or the difficulties in getting a loan. BIPOC communities often have a starting line that's far behind white Americans. And as such, they have to work much harder to overcome barriers to get to the same place. And if that wasn't enough, there's all the subtle cultural harms that are being done. Racist ads that tell Black people that their natural hair is frizzy or damaged or unprofessional, or cultural attacks on ingredients that's commonly found in Asian food, or ads that portray that a whole culture as being backwards or unsophisticated. And what happens is that contributes to a slow erosion of BIPOC communities' self-esteem. I'll give you a minute to look at all the examples that are here. And these are phrases that, I've personally heard and my BIPOC friends have heard, and micro-messaging that we're subjected to, very frequently. And sometimes even as a compliment, you can be made to feel like the other. For example, the first comment, it's something that I get, that I hear a lot because I love wearing the traditional dresses from my home country of Bangladesh. And that's, I love your dress. It's so exotic. I know it's a compliment and I know they mean well, but whenever they say exotic, it makes me feel like the other. Because if you look at the definition of exotic, it means of or originating from a foreign country. And to me, my traditional dresses aren't exotic. They're just comfort dresses. They're dresses that I wear every day. And then, the second, I hear that a lot too. You barely have an accent. The thing is, everyone has an accent because there's not one right way or one correct way to speak a language. And so when people say that to me, you barely have an accent, what they're really saying is that they're surprised to see a Desi immigrant speaking the way I speak without a Southeast Asian accent. So that actually gives us a really good segue into the next section, and that's to question white norms and bias. And as you saw from the previous example, white norms have a privileged place in society as it's valued as the default. It's treated as somehow being superior, and everything else is called non traditional or foreign or exotic or unprofessional. And you can see how this can lead to racism and how this can lead to people being excluded because you might not hire someone and say that it's because they're unprofessional, but in reality they're just different and they come from a different culture. And white norms is the default. To kind of give you an example of how pervasive it is, let's do a poll. We'll be launching a poll, and the question is, which of these statements do not involve the assumption of white norms? Is it A, smoking is harmful for your health? B, if you work hard, you'll succeed? C, US is above the equator on the world map? And D, straight hair looks the most professional. And I'll give you all a few seconds to complete that poll. And there's a couple of tricks thrown in there. Okay, so we have our poll results here, and 71% of you said that smoking is harmful for your health, and that's the statement that does not involve the assumption of white norms, and that is the correct answer. So good job, everyone. And then a couple of you, 29% said the US is above the equator on a world map. And this is the one that I said was the tricky one, right? Because you may be thinking that, hey, isn't that just a geographical fact? And yes, that is a geographical statement, but it's based on the Mercator map, which was made by European explorers. If you look at earlier maps that was made in Saudi Arabia or even earlier, you'll see that it's just as common to put the south as the top or the east as the top where the sun rises. And interestingly, this is a comment that a lot of people have been writing about because people have different maps on their background. And in Zoom conversations, a blogger was writing, he got asked, why is your map upside down? And he's like, hey, it's not. But anyways, another statement that I wanted to touch briefly on is something that that as a woman of color, I hear a lot, and that's if you work hard, you'll succeed. And that is a really harmful statement because it assumes that structural barriers aren't in place. So with that poll, you can kind of get a sense of how pervasive white norms is. So you could be asking me, okay, I understand I have to question white norms as the default. I have to question my biases as how do I do that? And it can be as simple as the next time when you hear someone from the BIPOC community talk about their experiences, it can be as simple as giving them space to talk. Just listen to them without thinking about how to respond. And if you start to feel uncomfortable, If you start to feel defensive, put aside your defensiveness, even if it's just for a moment, and resist the urge to rationalize. Allow yourself to feel the discomfort because that is an essential part of learning. Because it's when we realize our roles in perpetuating structural racism and we feel uncomfortable, that's when we want to change. And then finally ask yourself, why are you feeling the way you are feeling? If you're feeling defensive, ask yourself, why are you feeling defensive? So, a couple of helpful reminders to help you when you're practicing sitting in the discomfort and you're practicing hearing about your defensiveness and leaning a little bit into it. The first reminder is your experiences do not invalidate the experiences of others, even if you're part of a marginalized group yourself. And the reason why this is important is sometimes the defensiveness comes up because you hear someone saying negatively about something that you love. It could be your neighborhood, it could be the company that you work in. But remember, all of us have our blind spots. I remember when I first started at UT, my white Texan friends would get very surprised when I said I didn't think UT was very diverse because they felt like it was a very diverse place because they were having so many new experiences. But that's until you look at the statistics. And the statistics showed that there was less than 1% Black faculty in our engineering school. The second reminder is when the discomfort feels like it's too much and your brain is urging you to disengage, remember that's your fear coming in. Evolutionarily, our brain is designed to avoid anything that causes us pain or discomfort. But I want you to remind yourself at that point not to confuse safety with comfort, right? People are unsafe. You can see, we were talking about imminent harm at the start of this webinar, and that's real danger where structural racism is, unleashing violence and brutality in BIPOC communities. But when you can have a safe conversation where you're uncomfortable, that's not that you have to learn to disengage from the irrational fear part of your brain and tell yourself that, hey, I'm still safe. I'm uncomfortable because I'm learning new things, but I'm safe. So even if it's for 1 minute, 2 minutes, let's lean into this discomfort. So that actually brings us to our final segment, and that's, you've educated yourself on and tried to understand BIPOC issues. You've questioned your white norms and bias. Now, how do you leverage your power and privilege to speak up as an ally? And it might be harder than you think it is going to be, because remember, because of structural racism, when you speak up, you're going against the flow. So let's do another poll. And I want you to think of which barriers do you struggle with the most when you speak up as an ally? Is it that you don't want to get yourself in trouble? Is it that you think someone else will do something or nothing will really change systematically? Or are you just afraid of making things worse or you don't know what to say? And so the poll results are back, and 75% of you don't know what to say. And for that specific part, we will have some helpful phrases at the end of our webinar, so we're not caught like a deer in the headlights. 19% of you have said nothing will really change systematically. And that's one of the reasons why you don't intervene. And 6% say, I don't want to get myself into trouble. And that's a very real fear. And let's start with that. I don't want to get into trouble. The way structural racism is in our society makes that a really real fear. But don't let fear paralyze you. There are certain steps that you can take to minimize trouble or to assess whether you can help someone, right? The first thing is to assess the privilege and power of your social identity and intervene accordingly. For example, if you're a white employee in a company, you will most likely get more leeway than a Black or brown person. And then always check, is there an ally in a higher position who you can bring into the fold to help you all? And if you're in an unsafe space, definitely document the event to file for later and seek out safe spaces to discuss and find support resources. For example, we're having an open and honest conversation here at Herdacity about race and racism and how to be an ally. So Herdacity could be a great place to look for more support resources on how to be an ally in an unsafe space. But the reality is, you have to create a long-term exit plan, because you have to ask yourself, do you really want to work in a non-inclusive space where speaking up speaking up might potentially get you fired or in trouble? Working in a toxic environment can really erode at your self-esteem, over time. Let's look at, no one in the poll said this, that someone else will do something, but this is actually a common fear that a lot of people have. And so let's discuss this a little briefly. Social media might make you think that there's a lot of allies out there. People are sharing posts, but there is a difference between actually doing something and performative allyship. And I want to remind you that being an ally is hard work and it requires sacrifices. And so while being an ally, if things start getting hard, I want you to ask yourself why you wanted to be an ally in the first place. And the other thing is, because it is hard work, a good tip that we tell our clients is to be intentional in how you're using your time and energy and other resources to be an ally. For example, doom scrolling can take away a lot of energy without really having any effective impact. So just something to keep in mind. And a couple of you said, I think it was about 20% of you said nothing will change systematically. And I hear you, and I really feel you with this. In my anti-racism work, I have gotten off of Zoom calls where I've actually cried at the end of Zoom calls because the panelists on the other side or the team on the other side that I was working with really didn't understand what anti-racism work entailed. And I know it's frustrating, but I want to take you back to my sister's story. I want you to remember how different would it have been to her if someone spoke up, even if it was just a single voice. And so even if systemic change takes time, to the person you're speaking up for, to the person you're helping, it might mean the world to them. It might mean a world of difference. And another point that I want to say is, don't sell yourself short. You have a voice and you have a vote. Think of the privilege and power of your social identity. And, even if it's baby steps, we have to keep moving forward. And finally, I don't know what to say. This is a very, very common fear. And so we've listed some common phrases and strategies you can use to combat bias and be an ally. And racism can be really bewildering. And sometimes, when you hear it, you think you hear a comment, you can think, and this has happened to me a lot of times, which is why I, have all these phrases ready in my head. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to respond because I'm so shell shocked that someone would say that. And so the first strategy is to ask for clarification. And it can be as simple as, pausing and saying, hey, can you explain what you meant by that? Or you can say, break down your thinking, help me understand what you're thinking. Strategy number two, it's a little bit more direct than the first one. The first one is slightly indirect. Strategy number two is to break the stereotype. And you can say, that's not been my experience. Or you can say, that's not something that only applies to, and you can insert this stereotyped group. And the third one is more direct. You can directly explain the impact. You can say, that comment is hurtful. For example, if someone is saying disparaging things about the Black community, you can say, that comment is harmful to the Black community. Or you can say, I know you mean well, but that's offensive. And the other thing that I hear a lot of clients tell me is, I don't want to make things worse. How do I say the right thing? And my answer to that is, you can't. You can't always say the right thing. Missteps will happen. But I want to tell you that speaking up, however imperfectly, interrupts the bias and it helps immensely. So just speak up and you can keep learning. Maybe you said the wrong thing. You can learn and apologize and move forward and know better the next time. And, I want to remind you, our webinar was titled Allyship in Action for a reason, because I want you to know that only speaking up is a great first start, but I want you to do more. I want you to commit to action instead of just words. So how can you use your power and privilege? You can amplify the work of BIPOC colleagues who are more likely to get passed over in meetings or for promotions, and appreciate and praise them both publicly and privately. As a woman of color myself, I have my own internalized racial trauma that I need to work through and that I'm constantly working through. But when I'm in a meeting and I am the only person of color, it means so much to hear a boost of encouragement from an ally. So, that's a great way to leverage your power and privilege to get BIPOC colleagues more noticed. And then I'll learn about bystander training to intervene. We talked about imminent harm, and bystander training can be very, very helpful in those moments. And as I was saying, commit to action instead of words. And that actually leads us to the end of our webinar. But before I leave, I wanted you to do a small writing exercise. If you have a notebook or a piece of paper, I want you to very quickly write down some steps that you want to commit to for being an effective ally. Remember, we learned 3 steps today on how to be an ally. And, you can think of the acronym EQUAL and educate yourself on BIPOC issues. And one of the steps that you can commit to is following BIPOC senators and policymakers on Instagram, or to listen to a podcast on redlining. NPR's Code Switch podcast is a fantastic resource for that. The second step was to question your own biases and question white norms as the default. And so, one step you can commit to for that is to sit with your discomfort after a racially charged incident, or to journal about it later. And the last one, leverage. How can you leverage your power and privilege? You can commit to buying from BIPOC businesses You can commit to sharing, you know, work of BIPOC professionals in your line of work, in your LinkedIn or your social Instagram. So just take a minute to write down these steps, because I think there's power in writing, and I think there's power in being specific about how you want to commit to be an ally, even if it's, small steps. And so with that, I would like to open up the floor to questions and comments. But before I leave, I wanted to say a big thank you to my sister and co-founder of A Better Force, Saamiya Seraj. She helped me to develop the content for today and was on standby in case I couldn't talk because of my bronchitis. So thank you, Sarah. And I also wanted to thank Lorelei for all the help that she has given me, for this webinar, and for doing all the work she does for empowering women. Thank you, Lorelei.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much, Saamiya. That was an amazing educational moment for us. I hope we all learned a lot. So as Saamiya said, now's time for questions. You can send them either through the Q&A feature at the bottom or through the chat. Okay, so first question we have, this is from a person who identifies as queer. I often have people who expect us to sit with their discomfort, their uncomfortableness, their discomfort, and answer questions on being queer. Are there things that I can do to stop this from happening?
I think I think one of the things that, when we grow up with so much micromessaging, right? When we're different, we feel this urge to make the other person uncomfortable, and to make the other person feel comfortable. And I think we have to disengage from that need to make the other person uncomfortable, to make the other person comfortable. We have to draw our own boundaries, and we can say something like, this is a difficult issue for us to talk about. And, there are fantastic resources out there on the internet that you can, look up and learn more, and just maintain that boundary. Don't give in to your need to make the other person feel comfortable. That's their journey. That's their learning that they have to do.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think another great example is women carrying a lot of the emotional baggage for folks. What would you say in regards to that, as far as setting and holding boundaries when the social expectation is that, I mean, maybe that's not like women's work, but that's definitely the cultural assumption.
There's two parts to this. The first is to be really aware of why you're doing what you're doing. Because when we grow up with these internalized messaging, we sometimes don't even realize that we're doing so much of the extra work. So the first step is to be aware that you're carrying a lot of the emotional work, a lot of the invisible work. Write it down if you need to, because the more words that you can put in it, the better you'll be able to explain. And when you can explain it better, you can hold the boundary again better. So, for example, in a meeting, if you're asked to take notes or do an errand, you can practice from beforehand, practice some phrases. You can say, hey, I am actually doing the presentation, and I can't do both. Can someone else take the notes? Just be aware and speak up. And if you need to, you can talk to your manager later about it privately, and saying, hey, I noticed that this task gets delegated to me more often than any other people. Is there a reason for that? And I want to make you aware for that, because that is not what my position entails. And I think this work should be shared equally by the group.
Excellent. Thank you. Now we have a question about how to be an ally as a BIPOC member. They don't have white privilege, and they feel possibly like they might not be able to be as effective as a person who identifies as white. How can they be a better ally?
So the first thing is to work on your own internalized racial trauma. I'm a brown person, and one of the things that I realized is I was promoting white stereotypes without even realizing it. For the first few years in my professional career, I got commented a lot on how I should straighten my hair because that's more professional. And I didn't realize that I was, you know, leaning into the same racial stereotype. And so I've stopped doing that. I promote, I have my natural hair on display now, and I educate myself. The more you educate yourself, the more you can put words to your racial trauma, the better you can be an ally to people with less privilege than you. Learn about the own racial trauma that you have, learn about racial trauma that other people have, and then you can learn to speak up more effectively about it. And as always, if you can't speak up at the moment because you are marginalized as well, there are other things that you can do. You can offer support privately. You can find resources for them later on. And even sometimes when someone is being discriminated against, if you look at them or smile at them, or give them a gesture of, hey, I'm here with you, I know this sucks, that can be a helpful thing, in a very hard moment.
Excellent. Well, on the topic of allyship and being an ally, how does one have a conversation around setting expectations of allyship?
um, is this in a corporate setting or in a personal setting?
Either one.
Okay, so I think it depends. That's a really big question, and I think that's part of the reason why we do a lot of consulting with individuals and companies to cater to their unique situations. If you're a manager, then the approach would be, to educate yourself and really, really understand the backgrounds of your team members, talk to them, and try to really work on making the setting more inclusive. If you are not a manager or not in a position of power, then your approach has to be a lot different, more discreet. You can, I think the easiest and safest answer is to seek out affirming spaces for yourself, because when white norms are front and center, it's very easy to forget that there are others like you, and you can feel very alone. And I think if you seek out groups like Herdacity, you seek out groups, like there's equal opportunity engineering and different groups, the more you know that there are people like you, the more you educate yourself on issues, the better you will be able to speak up about it and set expectations unique to your situations. So the general answer to that is, one, um, seek safe, affirming spaces for yourself, and two, um, get resources to learn, how to talk about racial trauma and allyship.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And you were just setting up all these questions for me. So, is it on the topic of safety? Is it our responsibility to help make someone feel safe when we might be engaging in an uncomfortable conversation?
So it depends. If you are the person so one thing that we do a lot is we do a power check. Who holds power in a room? And as allies, the person who holds power in the room has the biggest responsibility to make the other person feel safe. And the sad part about it is the person who holds the power often doesn't know that they hold the power and that others are feeling unsafe. And so, again, that goes back to educating yourself and seeing the invisible threads of race and racism and the roles that we play in perpetuating it. So if you are the person of power in the room, you know how to try to make it safe. So I would say the person who has the most power and privilege in the room, it is of utmost importance for them to make the others feel safe.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, you shared a number of examples of maybe inadvertently or well-intended compliments that were racially charged, that were not really appropriate.
Mhm.
Could you give us some examples that maybe are not bias, that are not
Of
racially charged?
compliments.
Yeah, like give us the positive version of the I love your dress, it's so exotic.
I love your dress.
Thank you. Give us
Yeah,
some.
because and you know what the interesting thing is, when when anytime when someone has to explain something, that makes you feel uncomfortable, right? And you'll notice I never refer to my dress by its name. I called it my traditional dress, but I call it shalwar kameez. But if I said that, a lot of people might not know what that is. But anytime I can't say that word, it makes me feel a little smaller on the inside, right? And so that's where, follow people on Instagram. So, all of these, the more you follow, more you follow diverse people, the more you get, accustomed to, other cultures. And don't have a qualifier. Just say, hey, I love your dress. Hey, you look really nice. When you add a qualifier,
Mhm.
that's when you're that's when you're starting to, drift into the territory of you look nice because you're different.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that clarification. Now, I'm going to do our final question. It's a bit of a doozy. Um, share your thoughts on this, Samia.
Mhm,
So, lots of societies are having their emergent norms, right? Um,
mhm,
and that looks different for everyone.
mhm.
The person who's sending this question is asking, are we trying to change things to a point where there is no norm, or are we trying to increase the tolerance for things outside of the norm, or both?
That's a very difficult question. I think I, and this is my personal answer, right?
Right.
I would love for I would love for there to be no norms because we're so different, right? Like what is normal? And so I think if we saw each person as a person with their uniqueness, with their cultural, historical background, their own life story, what a different world that it would be instead of if we were making assumptions. So, yes, I would love to move towards a world where, there's not a normal and you see everyone for the unique person that they are and start there.
Excellent. Thank you so much for helping wrap all of this very interesting, difficult conversation in a nice little bow. This isn't going to solve our problems, right? This is just another beginning to a long conversation that will constantly be evolving. And I'm really glad that every one of you chose to join us in that conversation today. And I really want to thank Samia and her sister, Sarah, joining us today to support us in this effort. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And, as you said, it's an ongoing conversation. And, I'd love to continue this conversation with people. Um, you know, as I was saying earlier, we're a company that launched late last year in the pandemic. And so you can learn more about us at abetterforce.com. Or if you need to reach me and, schedule a consultation to talk about, your unique needs, you can reach me in my email that's listed there. And I also have our Linktree link up. It's Linktree at A Better Force, and all of our social media links are there. Follow us. We post a lot of free stuff and have our upcoming workshops there. And, you know, it's an ongoing journey, and I'd love to continue the conversation and help you in your journey towards racial allyship.
Thank you so much, Samia, and thank you all for joining us today.